Well, good morning. Welcome to Coffee with Ken. I'm Ken Biberai, your host today. Coffee with Ken is a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics that we started during the pandemic. And thrilled to be here with all of you today. And thanks for being in person in New York City on this rainy day. Today's topic, super timely, super important. We're going to talk about the future of how and where we work. And we have a pretty amazing and dynamic panel. It should prove for a lively discussion. First up, we got Maria Torres Springer, the New York City Deputy Mayor for Economic and Workplace Development. Phil Kirschner, Future of Work and Workplace Leader at McKinsey. And Joel Steinhaus, CEO of Daybase. Come on up, guys. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So Maria's sitting closest in case she doesn't like any of the questions or, anything that happens.
We could just focus on these sleeves. It's pretty amazing.
Real branding, Ken.
Well, listen, I think it's a topic du jour for everybody, right? Like, what does this new reality coming out of COVID look like for everyone? I've been fortunate coming to the city a few times since the pandemic and been blown away by, restaurants open and people eating in the streets and housing costs at a record high. So how do you juxtapose this vibrancy that you feel in the city walking around with offices that are like 40, 50% occupied? Like, how much of a concern is this for you, for the mayor, for the city, and for the future? And I think it's something obviously New York's dealing with, but every city is dealing with.
Oh, that's right. Good morning, everyone. Good to see all of you. So you're right, Ken, that the city is at a real inflection point. And, every decade or so, I'm sure the city has always felt like that. But there's some unique characteristics, I think, of the moment that we're in right now. You're right, of course, that a lot of the numbers are good, right? Tourism is back, pedestrian counts in Times Square. We're inching closer and closer towards our pre-pandemic employment levels, but office occupancy is still lagging other peer cities. And unemployment is still staggeringly, especially for Black and Brown communities, not where we want it to be. And so when we think about the fact that occupancy is lagging, for us, it means we have to be conscious of two things. One, a lot of these trends preceded the pandemic, right? So the densification of the office space, the remote work already happening across different companies, but it's happening right now at a time where we also have to think about the impact citywide. And that, I care about office buildings for sure, but there's a policy perspective here that's important to keep in mind. And so for example, the impacts of the decrease in spending from commuters, right, who otherwise would be in a place like Midtown, the impacts on MTA ridership, and those revenues, if you're not commuting, and the property tax collection with office spaces. So those are challenges, but in my mind, it's not a time to try to stand back up the city that existed the day before the shutdowns, right? It's not like we just want to unfreeze that time. It's an opportunity really to reimagine and rethink. And I know we'll talk a lot about this today, not just what the modern office building is, but our central business districts in general and our city writ large. I'll end this part because I would like for us to talk more about what that could look like. But I recently visited, and if you haven't been, I really recommend it. I recently visited the Museum of the City of New York. They have this exhibit called New York City at the Core. If you haven't been, highly recommend that you go. And what's amazing about that exhibit is that it tells our 400-year history as a city through different eras. And it has artifacts really of the energy and struggle of different generations of immigrants and tycoons and politicians and master builders. But what it showed is that the city changed over time, made its great leaps forward, not just by necessity, whether it was a pandemic or a fiscal crisis, et cetera, but because of the will of the people. And so that is our opportunity today to think about the future of work, to think about the impacts of remote work, not just as it implicates what happens to a building like this or others across our central business districts, but what it means for generating the type of opportunity for New Yorkers so that this city continues to be the type of place where people want to live and want to work. And so that I think is the bigger picture question that we have the opportunity to answer.
Joel, pre-pandemic, you were at WeWork. And if you go back even further, coming out of the recession in 2008 and 9, that's when WeWork really exploded and created this kind of feel of community coming together. And the thesis then seemed really to offer space and location and community at Main and Main. Your thesis coming out of this crisis and this next decade is a little different. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about Daybase and what your thesis is now?
Yeah, thanks. And good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be up here and share the stage with some longtime friends, and to do it in person in New York City is
And you wore your
fantastic.
best street.
And I did. I wore my dress pumps. So just for introductory sake, Daybase, we are creating a network of on-demand neighborhood co-working. And so, when I hear statements like the will of the people, that's how we think about our product and what we're trying to do. If you think about what the pandemic actually did, it did many things. But what it did was it forced people into their homes to work from their homes, and as a result, so that was a forcing mechanism that also enabled a different level of choice and autonomy over where and when they worked, right? And the other thing that it did was it blurred the line between the personal and the professional, which had incredibly, negative aspects to it. But it also created this sense that we needed to start to integrate work more deeply into the rest of our lives. And so when you think about the actual demand side of the equation, I think that we focus a lot on the supply side, right? I think we have the built environment, which is rigid by its nature, and we focus on what can we do with this supply. But if you flip it a little bit and you say, okay, so what really is the demand coming out of the pandemic? We think that the choice and the autonomy of the individual is the individual has unprecedented choice over where and when they work. And as a result, if we react to what we believe the demand is going to be into the future, we'll rethink the way that the built environment works. So that's how we think about what Daybase is trying to do.
When I'm not hosting riveting coffee conversations, Phil, I work at Savills, and we advise companies on, their space and utilization and how to think about the future. And I think so much of the conversation immediately gets skewed to like how many days a week and like, what's the setup and all this, right? Like just taking a step back, what's the purpose of the office? Like, what are you advising companies and organizations to think about as you think about being in the same place to collaborate and create business? Like, what's the purpose? Why even have it?
Yeah, we could take the entire rest of the session answering that question, I think. But I'll break it down in a couple of ways. So purpose is really important to all of us. And I think as a generalization, the younger you are, the more strongly we believe that if I'm spending 12 hours a day for work, that whatever I'm doing that I think of as work should be aligned with my own sense of self and fulfillment and purpose. And if it doesn't, I'm more likely to leave and find something that does. So that's a precondition. Two, I'd argue what COVID has shown us is that most offices prior to the pandemic could not have articulated their own purpose. Usually it was, hey, why do we have an office in Chicago? And the answer would be, because we have 500 employees in Chicago, which is like not a great reason when now leadership that might be saying, I want you back in the office a certain number of days, and the general working population goes, for what? And an answer like, to collaborate or to connect is not enough. So we're expecting a much more authentic and specific purpose, not just of the office, is the other point, but of all the workplaces that we go to. And can you open saying, restaurants are back, and travel is back, and theaters back, and stadiums are back, because we know why we go there. Those places align with our things that are important to us, like spending time with our family or being entertained or having a great meal. We don't go back to bad restaurants twice. So the onus now is on occupiers. And then also, I think landlords have put together really interesting multidimensional spaces to say, this is what happens here. And not to rely on telling you when or how often to be there, but to just put a stake in the ground and go, yeah, you can collaborate from home. But in the case of a life sciences client of ours, using a phrase like, our headquarters is here to help us accelerate clinical speed. Not collaborate, not be more productive, accelerate clinical speed. And if I was the kind of person who studied biology and went to work for a life sciences company intentionally, I might be in my home going, yeah, I can do most of my work here, but could I really argue that I'm accelerating clinical speed being here when that workplace, that headquarters, whatever you want to call it, has labs and has other scientists and has visiting companies and partners, be like, no, I'm going to go in because that's exciting to me. So it's the bar's higher to articulate the purpose of all of the workplaces that we go to, not just the office, so to speak.
Just to piggyback on that. So, and you had a great post the other day from Cass Sustin from the Kennedy School about nudging, right? So it's less about a mandate, but creating a reason and motivation to actually attract people, right? Like, so how are they thinking about this? Are people focused on the wrong thing? I mean, what are you advising your clients?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's read the book Nudge, I did during the pandemic and was inspired by like, the phrase workplace choice architecture, like a somewhat paternalistic way of making us do something that is good for us, not really thinking about it as applied to the workplace, historically has only ever been used for like auto enrolling you in your 401k. Because some people forget. So now a lot of companies will say, hey, we've auto enrolled you at 3%. And if you forget, maybe they escalate 1% a year, but it's like, it's good for us, but it's not a bother. I was like, oh gosh, this is what we need. We shouldn't be mandating employees to come, and you have to motivate them. We all make decisions all the time and on our own, obviously. And unfortunately, COVID has just created an unbelievable decision fatigue. Used to be like, I go to my desk, I always meet Maria in conference room A on Monday, it's the same. Now it's who's going to be there? Who's watching my kids? What's the weather like? What's the transit? Do I want to go? Who's sick? Who's not? Like, too many decisions. So the future that we need, I think, is that, where Siri wakes up in the morning and says, hey, by the way, like, you've got that panel thing today, and Ken's going to be in the office, and the office is amazing, and that room is available, and there's an event after work. Do you want me to like book you lunch and do all these things? And you just go, thanks, and be on your way, right? We're a long way off from that, but that we need the suggestion and not the instruction.
Just to build on that, I think you can broaden that to not just the employer and the building, but to what central business districts are, right? They have to, I'd like to think that central business districts are great because they've always been great. It's the same way New York City is the greatest city in the world and will always be great. But obviously the world has changed, right? And what could those nudges look like if you expanded it geographically so that it is, certainly what the amenities are in any particular office building, and we don't have to reinvent this. We could rely on what makes New York City great anyway, right? It's diversity, it's talent, it's culture. And if central business districts, whether they're in Manhattan or across the 5 boroughs, of course, they are places that have really vibrant, active streets where the public realm is safe and it's clean, where there is as much culture as possible. What if our commute options, again, were we could rely on them and those too were safe? Those are the types of nudges that really compel us from the public sector to say, in order to have those nudges, what is then the series of actions and investments and policies that allow us to have these places where New Yorkers want to live? Because I don't think we can scold them into just coming back.
Yeah.
That is such a good idea. I'm sorry, just like to have every office within a few blocks of here be able to also say, and here's what's on in Bryant Park, is such an amazing idea. I mean, that's great. Yeah.
And Joel, when you're talking to your clients and thinking through the demand generators you're feeling, how are people balancing this? How are they, what are companies looking to offer to nudge or incentivize or support their talent who maybe doesn't want to come in 5 days a week? How are you thinking about what Daybase can and should be around the country?
Yeah, so our view is that it's not a one size fits all approach, that certain roles, certain companies, certain teams need different things. And we've had this blunt instrument of a corporate office since, the early 1900s that hasn't really had a lot of innovation applied to it so that we could consume it differently. We think that, again, I agree completely with Maria's assessment of livability in the city and drawing people for livability. And I think that you're now in competition as a city for individuals as much as you are for companies. And that's the way it should be. And so we have to think about livability in short term, intermediate term, and long term. And I think there's certain short-term interventions that you have to think about every day, of course. And I sort of love the notion that I saw yesterday of newsstands being converted to refueling spots for delivery workers, right? And these are the kinds of things that New York tries, and we should continue to try. But then if you start to think about, okay, what's the long term? Well, you have companies that are buying real estate or taking out long-term leases. To me, they better be thinking about the workforce that they're going to develop that's homegrown over the next 20 years that they've thought about that real estate. And so to me, really thinking about how companies can plan for long-term resiliency, and that has a lot to do with talent and actually growing the talent here in New York City. And then there's short-term interventions that are going to make this place livable. And of course, I'd be remiss to not mention the importance of parks and open space, as I typically do in your list of things. But I think that if we do those things, people will want to continue to thrive in New York City.
So the biggest thing coming out of the pandemic is talent, right? And everyone's bending over backwards to accommodate talent, recruit talent, bring them to cities, bring them to companies. How do you think about the next 10, 20 years and the workforce, right? That's part of this new title you have, right? It's not just Deputy Mayor for Economic Development, it's about workforce. Yeah. So what are you telling business leaders? What are you telling about talent? How do we attract and continue to be a magnet for innovators in New York City?
Yeah, I mean, that is in many ways my number one goal. Because what I hear all the time from employers, and, of course, there are lots of opinions, and rightfully so, about what it means to make sure that this city is as safe as possible. But it's always about the people. It's always about talent. And I think it's important when we think about policy solutions, it's always what problem you're trying to solve and who we're trying to solve it for. And I have to think about knowledge workers and the talent that's needed for the amazing companies are going to grow here. But of course, that's not the only workforce in this city. So when we think about the future of our central business districts, it is not just about the knowledge workers in beautiful amenity-rich spaces. All of the workers across different sectors who rely, right, on the type of foot traffic and the type of commuter patterns and occupancy, the dry cleaners, the restaurant owners, you name it. And it's really that full picture that we have to keep in mind when we think about the workforce. So I'll mention two things that I think are just fundamental, regardless of the type of employee you are in this city. Number one, we've talked a lot about it, but quality of life and making sure that New York retains all that makes it great and special, and the type of place where dreamers and doers and strivers can succeed. The second is our housing crisis. I was just chatting with a couple of old colleagues earlier today, and it is, I think, unfortunately, while 60,000 people slept in our shelters last night, in the last decade, for every 4 jobs, we've only created 1 unit of housing. We are in a deep housing crisis. But too often, the issue of housing and the issue of affordable housing for the average New Yorker is a distant headline versus a call to action. So if we are going to continue to not just retain, but attract the type of talent here, if this is going to be the type of place where you might start off in a low-wage job, but there's a real ladder, that I think is the existential fundamental crisis that we as a city and as a state really need to start grappling with. Otherwise, it is incremental progress towards challenges that really have the potential of weakening our long-term competitiveness as a city.
I just want to piggyback on that, because we think a lot about the housing crisis and how our solution might have an influence on it. And so when you think about housing, we often, again, think about supply, right? We say, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if we just converted all of these office buildings to housing, right? It's easier said than done for a lot of reasons that my colleagues can get into. But, when we think about remote work or hybrid work or flexible work, whatever you want to call it and however you want to define it, we actually think that's an opportunity, because if you start to understand how people actually want to use and consume the office part of the built environment, then you'll have a better sense of where and how they want to live. And as a result, housing, if we, again, consume the built environment more flexibly, You could theoretically densify housing because you wouldn't have to have an individual home office in every apartment unit that needed a home office. Or you could have people that are living a little bit further afield because they're not commuting on the same regular basis. So if you start to think about just the way that the demand influences the potential supply, we think that there's behavioral outcomes or behavioral inputs, that is, to a potential outcome that we should start to think about as well.
Phil, let's drag you in here because you've talked a little bit about a pending crisis with some of these buildings with higher vacancy rates, potential mortgages coming up. How do you look around New York City and think about the future of real estate in the built environment? I mean, do you think we should be taking buildings, converting them? When you walk the streets of New York, what do you think about the future? What's your advice to the deputy mayor on how to think about 10, 20 years down the road? Is it zoning? Is it NIMBYism? Like, what are the challenges around, no pressure,
None.
just the future of New York?
After the robot wars.
You can do
I
it.
know
Phil.
after the road. What Ken is alluding to is an article I didn't write, to be clear. I just thought, I don't know if anyone noticed this. We spent 2.5 years sort of poking, I'm a workplace strategist, so poking at all the occupiers and what the occupiers are and aren't saying about the return to work. Like, what is Google saying? What is JP Morgan saying? Right? That's been like the news cycle for the last 2.5 years. Something changed recently. There was an article in Bloomberg that started calling out individual buildings. And I thought that was like based on completely publicly available data. There's no surprises here. We all know where the buildings are. We know, I mean, there are real estate people in the room. The vacancy. Yes. So we're like, and when you layer in the architecture firms that have, defined the standards with the city of what kind of building on the surface, like could or couldn't ever be converted to residential, right? There's just some that don't make sense. And then layer in the sort of debt situation on the building, and you start to be able to point out like, ooh, that one, there's a question. And I think it's fascinating on the kind of pressure it will start to apply for like, how quickly could we get to the future that I think holistically we all know we need, right? Maria said, like, there was always a little bit too much space before, right? Every company that moved from the sort of older corridors to newer buildings like this one or the West Side or downtown, without even trying very hard, was shedding quite a lot of space just because the building is more efficient. And I think, and I'm a New York City native. I'm vested in this problem. All the kinds of places we're talking about need to, like, I think, this is a city of, in Manhattan anyway, very like homogeneous spots of types of spaces, right? We have so much office, but like, it's not frankly, like near me where I live on the West Side. And I can't wait until there's a little bit more sort of living here and a little bit more working there. Is there going to be like 100 million square feet of office in the West Side, Upper West Side? No. But would I love to have other options for places to work on the streetscape? Yes. Daybase or otherwise, right? Like, because as easy it is for me to be in my home, I don't want to be there all the time. I have kids, apartment, don't have lavish, enormous offices here. It's just like not practical. So I'm very much looking forward to the sort of city as a workplace, right? And becoming more fluid and how zoning, and I'm not a zoning person, but the demand and zoning changes allowing there to be a little bit more of a blend and a reimagination of the kinds of spaces that are there to be more functional and community oriented and hospitality. So you don't really think of how hard the line is between, oh, this is residential, this is retail, this is office. Like this is all place at the end of the day, and how fluid is that between.
And I mean, there seems to be a tremendous flight to quality, right? Like you look at one Vanderbilt and the rents there are astronomical. You look at JP Morgan,
full,
and full and busy.
It's not the price.
Downtown Hudson Yards. So are you thinking, Maria, I mean, how's the mayor thinking about just the actual buildings and real estate and incentivizing the private sector maybe to kind of rethink this? I mean, we were talking to some colleagues and real estate coming out of the pandemic seems to be on its head, right? You have office buildings now converting to hotels. You have vacant land being converted. You have retail space used as industrial for distribution for last mile. I mean, this seems to be a moment to kind of shed the kind of conventional wisdom and how we've looked at old zoning laws and rules and how we use physical space.
That's right. I mean, I think it has to be all of the above. So the one thing that we have to be careful not to do is overcorrect, right? To say that we can't turn our back on Midtown. We never will. It will always be a hub and a magnet for the types of jobs that the city needs and our tax base really relies on. At the same time, whether it is zoning, all of the regulatory barriers that make it just too difficult to do really anything in this city. The nudges, whether they are through incentives or other programs for the right types of buildings. We've done it before, right? You look at what happened after 9/11, the city asked itself, not just asked itself a number of questions about the future of Lower Manhattan, but then brought to bear the types of programs and interventions and called in the civic sector and the private sector to help rebuild in a way that made sense for what people wanted to do, how they wanted to live and work in Lower Manhattan. And we have the opportunity to do that again. Phil mentioned the city as a workplace. Another idea that we're really looking into is how about the city as a classroom? How do we think about these spaces, vacant or underutilized, as opportunities to promote the types of goals that I know we all care about, whether it is our lack of childcare, for affordable childcare facilities in this city, the other forms of social infrastructure, workforce development. Too many New Yorkers have never been in these office buildings. This is their city. These are, their buildings too. And that we have a very talented young person grow in our public schools who's never seen the inside of these amazing office buildings. And that it's unfortunate, not just because it means there hasn't been that access, but so much of what human beings aspire to, they do that because they see it. And we have to collapse the distance between what office buildings or other major institutions in this city provide, both symbolically and in real life, and what too many New Yorkers are experiencing today. So that, I think, is an important and exciting opportunity. None of this, by the way, of course, is a silver bullet. If there's anyone who says they have a playbook for how to revive and ensure the resurgence and resiliency of central business districts post-pandemic, I'd like to meet that person.
I was just gonna ask Phil. I was just
but the thing that we can't do, and back to what I said earlier, is just rely on the fact that New York City is the greatest city on the planet. It is, and yet we have to keep evolving and pivoting and undertaking a recovery here that doesn't leave people and communities behind.
And I think the flip side of those not being able to, not having access to going into the large office buildings is the people that are in those buildings are so far away from what's literally going on the ground. And so you could have somebody who commutes into the city, spends all day in an office tower, never really interacts with what's going on the ground. And as a result, you have, as you know, municipal rates are incredibly low relative to the influence that those elections and other decisions have on giant populations, and getting people engaged in that sort of more civic life. I think the opportunity is actually making things more local potentially, right? I mean, certainly bringing things down to the ground level, literally and figuratively, right? And I think that if you did that, then maybe your childcare is more integrated with your work life and it's more integrated with the rest of your neighborhood in a fundamentally different way. And I think we have examples in New York City of this that weren't caused by a crisis. Like you think about Chelsea and the meatpacking district and what the High Line has done and other, corporate commitment around that area to being there. It's fundamentally transformed that neighborhood over the last 20 years, certainly. And so I think that there are absolutely examples of the way to do it. Unfortunately, it does take some patience, right? I mean, and I think that we have to have a longer term view. And the question is, are we set up for that from a political point of view?
And then we're going to open it up to audience questions in a moment. Phil, just picking up on the overcorrecting kind of concern. We were chatting briefly with Andrew Ridgey from the New York City Hospitality Alliance, who's here today. And if you go back to the pandemic, it was one of these things where it was like people are never going to eat in restaurants ever again. So we should transform how we eat, and no one's ever going to commute and no one's going to come here, right? Like there is kind of, these articles we've all read, right? We slingshot one way or the other. So how do you balance the real kind of undertone of things are never really going to absolutely be the same that they were, but not overcorrect? How do you kind of help companies and your clients think through this, right? Like what's the right standard deviation here?
I mean, I think when it comes to corporate real estate, someone said to me once, especially on the occupier side, if you make a bad decision, you will have a black eye internally for a decade. Everyone remembers Bob
stares into the audience to scare everybody.
Right. Like, oh, Bob signed that lousy lease 8 years ago. We're still living in it. It can't move. We can't do anything about it. We're stuck here because the entire
Bob
concept.
sucks.
Yeah, God, Bob. I don't know why Bob. I'm sorry. I studied computer science. Everything computer science is always Alice and Bob. It's like for 50 years. So Bob is always my thing. But that's because real estate was viewed as static. It doesn't move very quickly. And a lot of technology startups and companies like WeWork like showed the industry, oh no, it can with will like move faster. It can be more dynamic. We can change, we can build, we can rebuild. It can be more modular. As everything becomes more fluid, I believe a little bit there, we shouldn't shy away from having to add more of something because in theory, 30, 40 years from now, adding more of something or changing should be easier. But the second argument I find myself into on sort of the overcorrection is growth for jobs. Right? What if we converted all the offices to housing, what happens when we have thousands of new jobs that we want to bring to the city? And yeah, we want this to be somewhere where people want to live and also work, right? They don't necessarily have to be so connected, right? But the entire phrase return to office or return to work means nothing for every company that has been started since 2020, right? The next class of unicorns that we're all talking about in a few years will have all started at a minimum in a kind of remote first context. That doesn't mean that place isn't important or that they won't have offices or dedicated workplaces to serve certain purpose, but they're not gonna leap to it. It's not in the startup manual anymore where you say, right, hire your first employee, set up payroll, get an office. That's not like step 3. So how do we attract people to want to stay in the jobs? But it isn't that we need to grow in traditional office space the way that we always have. And hopefully, like everyone here is solving the fact that we shouldn't be so afraid of like under capacity, because it doesn't have to be a desk every time. Even at WeWork, say this all the time, like every occupier head of real estate has been conditioned to fear the red line. What if it's too full? But actually, the fullness is the feeling that we're all missing. We are the best amenity in the workplace. It's people, it's not beanbags. So I think especially in this city, we're okay with a little overcrowding while we build a bit more of the thing that we need. With the exception of housing, which we do need. Here, that one is non-negotiable.
Guys, thank you so much.
Thank
And we'll open up to a couple questions. Steve.
So one thing you said, Phil, that I thought I hadn't heard articulated, that makes a lot of sense to me, is you're advising companies, you need a clear vision of why you should be back. It's not enough for us to say to people who work for us, it's important for culture, we need to collaborate. Those are too much. You give the life sciences example that accelerating clinical vision. Do you think that every company has a vision that can be articulated that justifies coming back? And the example you gave is a great one, but I can imagine there's plenty of companies where it's like, can I really articulate that? And if not, how do you think about advising those companies? What does that look like? And for the deputy mayor, I'm just curious, we're talking about the need to reimagine central business districts and the importance of obviously safety and cleanliness and all that. How all that requires a lot of investment at a time when we think everyone's acknowledging we're moving to a place where revenues from individuals, property taxes, ridership are going to be down, at least temporarily, over the next several years. How do we avoid being in a situation where we can't invest? How can you and the mayor, as a policy matter, make sure we're doing those things while dealing with the inevitable actions?
Sure. So to repeat, how do you articulate a vision? Like, can every company equally have the opportunity of articulating a vision of why you should return? What's the compelling reason? That's sort of the short version of your question. Yeah, we advise, there is never going to be a fixed answer to this very flexible problem. So we tell executives like state the direction of travel. That doesn't commit you to do anything, but you've got to give your employees a sense of what you believe in, because the longer you wait, they will go somewhere else where it's clearer. And not every one of your employee typologies will have the same ability in terms of flexibility, but even I think top occupiers are saying to populations of, like even Apple, which we've all heard like has had difficulties with their employees returning, has also said quietly they are looking for ways to provide retail store employees a degree of flexibility. So there's a way to do it at the top of the house. But coming back to purpose, yeah, I do think that some industries will struggle to be able to articulate the employee value proposition. Like I came from financial services, and it is not a new trend that, whatever percentage of like Harvard's graduating class that would have gone into banking as a de facto career 20 years ago has not been the case since long before the pandemic. There are a lot of other more interesting things to do now than like just go into banking. And that's going to make it really difficult for a lot of companies, I think, to say, not only like come work for me because my purpose is capitalism, which is, it's true. But also saying like, not just come work for me here is going to be harder. And like some people will want to, but the holistic employee value proposition will have people in all industries, all worker typologies searching for something that aligns with their sense of purpose and flexibility overall.
On the question about striking that balance, I mean, it just has to be what we do. I mean, we still have $100 billion city budget, and that can and must be spent in the most efficient and effective way. And the choices that we make about how trash is picked up, about how law enforcement is deployed in this city, that's within that budget. And we're, of course, committed to making sure that the budget that we already have, that is deployed in ways that are prudent and get the outcomes that we want. At the same time, we have to operate in a different gear of not making the types of choices that make investment in this city harder. So all that I talked about in terms of investing in our people, investments in the public realm, investments in cultural institutions, those are in fact investments. If you don't do those two things, you are in my opinion, a spiral of neighborhoods and the city in general not being, as we've talked about on this panel, the type of place where people want to work and live, and that then has negative impacts on the tax base, but then makes it harder to do the basic things. And so I'm not saying it's easy, but that is precisely the types of gears that we in government need to constantly operate under. And that is to survive the next couple of years, right? There is the longer term that I know that the mayor is always thinking about. We are always thinking about what will ensure not just to keep our tax base as strong as possible, but where we need to remain competitive. And so all that we're talking about in terms of housing, in terms of improving finally our infrastructure, those are the types of projects and investments that require political capital, require financial capital, and you reap the benefits of that, not in 6-month, 1-year increments, but that's generational. But those are that's the type of mission that this administration is focused on, and frankly, the type of mission that more New Yorkers have to really galvanize around. Because if it's just about balancing the budget in any given year, that is, it's a minimum that's needed in order to accelerate the recovery, but not sufficient in terms of what this city needs over the long run, in my opinion.
Okay. Speak up, please. Can you?
Yes, sir. I apologize. Deputy Mayor. It's a bit of a tricky question. We talk a lot about Daybase is a regional approach to the city, specifically housing crisis, right? As well as we just specifically, right? Me, a person who lived in New York City for 20+ years, I lived here. Well, I got the Amtrak this morning. I'm here because, for the 50 a.m. So, how can the city, from a political perspective, actually adopt a regional solution to our base problems?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more that it has to be a regional response. The city can't solve this alone. It requires all levels of government. So I haven't mentioned yet that the mayor and the governor co-convened a panel of 60 or so, really amazing people from different sectors. And for those who follow the politics, that the mayor of New York City and the governor of New York State have co-convened anything is actually like a feat. Given the developments of the last decade or so. But together, we are trying to tackle what needs to happen, first and foremost with our central business districts, but it has all of these implications on infrastructure, on what those investments need to be. And of course, the housing crisis has to be a partnership of, New York City, but also the entire region. I mean, you look at what it is unfathomable to me, that New York State, that our area, it is that the work that we are doing in terms of housing growth and housing equity, that places like California and Massachusetts, no offense to California and Massachusetts, that they are bolder in terms of regional housing equity. So there's a lot to learn there. And then, of course, a lot to triangulate with the particular politics, but that's exactly what we need to do. We need to untether ourselves from the routine politics that makes it difficult to solve these long-term crises. Untether ourselves from the politics that too often water down our aspirations as a city in terms of infrastructure and housing. Again, not easy, but I've thought of myself as a chronic, almost pathological optimist. So I think there's an opportunity here, and we should seize all of it for all of these issues that require more than just city action.
Andrew.
Following up on optimism, listen to a lot of these panel discussions and, not too long ago, we were talking about the city going into the Great Depression. You mentioned no one wanted to eat next to each other. I mean, I've been better or worse since the beginning of the pandemic, all different neighborhoods, particularly in the town. You walk around, you can have your eyes closed a few times so they're not welcome to anyone. People everywhere, yes, there's unique challenges. We're all in this room together. So much of the narrative, right? And they can be even the power of narrative. We're talking about all these challenges. How are we going to fill this office space? How are we going to deal with people not feeling safe and perception of problems? Instead of just talking about all the opportunities. And when I think about here, all the beautiful, amazing new restaurants that are open. Think about the cultural institution. You mentioned the Museum of the City of New York. How do we get more people to focus the conversation on all of the opportunities that are here? Because that's the beauty of it. Government can do so much. We're talking about like the meat package, like remember the garage, remember when restaurants and everything started changing that neighborhood. So a lot of that we're just like more want to go out and see amazing opportunities that we wanted to create. So how do we just change the narrative from all these challenges and problems we have to seeing these challenges and problems as an opportunity? The best entrepreneur, the best developer are the one to do that. So,
Making it-
how do we change the narrative in the way we discuss the challenge?
I have sort of an answer, which is we talk a lot about actually the framing of this panel was, do we lean into hybrid work? And not to steal the thunder of the last question, but how is New York City going to lean into hybrid work, or should it lean into hybrid work? And the truth is, like, we need to define what hybrid work really means. Like, everybody's got a different definition of what hybrid is. So when I worked at a large financial services company, we did work on the ground in 100 countries. And when they invented the telephone, we were doing hybrid work, right? Because you were doing work across borders and across the where. And while many people say work is a place, right, it's actually the collection of activities that you do together collectively. And so when you think about the framing of what hybrid could mean, it could mean that we use the built environment differently. It could mean a narrative around what the opportunity is. It could mean a narrative around what makes this city different and great and will continue to make it different and great. It is a beacon of hope for millions of people globally and continues to be. It definitely has a brand. And so I think that when you start to think about that narrative, I think a lot of it comes down to brand. I think a lot of it comes down to what is special about this place. And I think that a lot of it comes down to changing, as you say, the narrative from a divisive this versus that binary of like, return to office or don't. It doesn't have to be that. We can return to the office some of the time for the things we need to do together based on outcomes, as opposed to thinking about this normative behavioral pattern that we used to have. And by the way, that created a thing called rush hour, which I'm a crusader against. I think that we should ban rush hour. I think it should be out of here. That's my political platform.
That's
What
your
do you think of
state
that? That's my
legislative
thing.
agenda.
Like
Got it.
ban rush hour. No, but I mean, if you start to think about the way that the MTA does things and has for many years, there's off peak and peak. And so how do you think about, whether it's pricing or whatever it is in different industries and off peak and peak? And how can we get more users, individual, discrete humans through the city? And is that the opportunity to think about, do we use our built environment completely differently? And do we have different services and different amenities? Matt's got something in there. Sorry, Ken. I'm going to cross out, Ken.
Is around the economically full segment of the population that gets asked cancer questions like this. There's a whole segment of the population where it's, you're at your retail spot by 9 a.m., you're working 6, right? And I think that when I think about that segment of the population and how well we do or don't address them and their needs, you look at a city like San Francisco, which is really stuttering right now. It's done, remarkably well over the last 2 decades, cultivating the tech sector, but clearly pretty poorly in terms of taking care of its citizens who don't have access. And how are we going to draw that connections? And there are ways that we can incentivize businesses to invest themselves in the local community that don't require taxpayers, right? Like if you engage with the community system, we'll give you input on the curriculum. That's a novel notion where all of a sudden I feel, worth to my investment in city institutions. I would love to see us contemplate notions like that. A large business can be thinking about how they can invest in city institutions and improve value from that investment in a way that lifts the beyond.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to be clear, it's large employers doing that can't just be a matter of corporate social responsibility, right? The homegrown talent in the city is extraordinary. And what we have to do better in government is kind of set the table where that type of partnership works. And it's already happened. So for instance, just a few weeks ago, we announced with a number of major employers a number of programs, basically modern apprenticeships. And so it's a collaboration between DOE and CUNY and major employers. Those types of programs are great and they need to be scaled tremendously, not because this is good PR for the employers who do it, but because they need that talent. And we have that talent in our city. And so I think this gets back to, Andrew, your question. How do we do these things because they organically are the right thing to do? How do we allow the stories to be told, not because they're on the front page of the tabloids, but because it's what New Yorkers are actually experiencing and are capable of doing? How do we help broker the partnerships because they make sense for everyone involved? And a lot of that is, I think, the calling in of different people who, whether it's because of the pandemic or because the corrosive discourse in this country over the course of the last few decades has made that harder. How do we start repairing some of those bonds in order for that type of, real connectivity? Not not the fake kind or the transactional kind, but real connectivity to happen. And I think it's possible. And it's exactly where we need to lean in.
Yeah, I'll just comment back to the first question on purpose. One of my clients, well, when we talk about purpose of the office, right? If you're going to set for an employee at any level, why do you come here? And if someone said, just to take my industry, like professional services, consulting, a big portion for McKinsey's own office is for apprenticeship, right? Like people are on different projects all the time. So one of the prevailing purposes is when you come here, you should be meeting people outside of your project team, someone new, something new. So imagine when if I left the office, just like I get a 5-star Uber rating when I get out of the car, like how was your ride? If I was asked, not just like how was work today, but did you meet someone new, something new today, yes or no? And if the prevailing answer is like 1 star, we have a problem. Some of our clients are starting to think of one of the roles of big offices, big presences here is to bring the city back, to do something good for the city, for minority businesses, for culture, for whatever. If they put it on the line and say, we're here to not just be good for us, but to be good for the community around us, we should all be asking how, like on a daily basis. What are you doing that is improving the streetscape, the cityscape, the culture, the education, working across like lines of worker typologies. And maybe it's as simple as like, yeah, I funneled 100 people to the Bryant Park Film Festival today. We got them here, but also I like apprentice however many students, like holding them accountable at the city level and as employees to like, are we making this place better for everyone?
Phil Kirschner, Joel Steinhaus, Maria Torres Springer, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
It's always fun to be in person and get together. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for tuning in. If you're watching from home, visit coffeewithken.com to catch up on past sessions and future episodes. Take care.